Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and we talked about the Capcom Super Elections about a month ago, I think? As a refresher, it was a consumer survey Capcom put out, asking things like what your favorite game and character of theirs was, what they're doing well, and what they need to work on. It's still up until the 12th yet if you haven't given it a look, but about a week ago we got something back from it. We got a word bubble containing the most popular words from over 200,000 votes. So why not take a look through the results and see if we can glean anything? I'm doing this with the assumption that the bigger, the more they appeared, and that they're taking these specifically from the open-ended comment bit at the end, since I wouldn't expect some of these words or phrases to qualify if they were directly competing with the answers to the multiple choice, though I could be wrong. So let's give this sucker a look. There's 6 things that really stand out. Capcom is one of them. Imagine that. Capcom is mentioned a lot on a survey run by Capcom where they ask how Capcom is doing. Likewise, it's not very surprising that game and remake are pretty huge too. Thank you is also pretty big, making you remember how the questionnaire asks for up to 3 things you love about Capcom, but only 1 complaint. And the "we welcome all your support for Capcom" question that wasn't actually a question, like they were really desperate for validation. Still though, the company has had a huge impact on my life, so you know what, I'll stop with the digs and instead say, unironically, thank you Capcom. I would not be the person I am today without Mega Man, and speaking of, look how big Mega Man is listed on this thing. I haven't gotten out a ruler, but is the text for Mega Man slightly bigger than everything else? No, I think it's just bias. I think it's the same font size as the other 5. This is where we can start picking out some of the smaller words though. Not gonna go over everything here, but there are a few smaller mentions that are relevant for some of the bigger words. For Mega Man, you get Legends, which almost has to be a reference to the Legends series. I know a lot of people out there are still pining after the Legends 3 that could have been. Star Force is obviously Mega Man Star Force. Classic could refer to the original Mega Man series, though Capcom also has a ton of other classic series, so... And Collection is in there. While Mega Man gets a lot of those, he's not the only one, but Legacy is also listed, and that is a word associated with the Mega Man collections in particular. Battle and Network are listed separately, kind of highlighting a problem here. With phrases like "the game" and "haunting Leon" being smushed together, it can be kind of hard to tell what belongs together and what, unfortunately, might have gotten separated. So maybe Battle and Network should have been next to each other, or maybe people were talking about boss battles and network stability for Street Fighter. Also muddying the waters is the giant remake, which I mentioned earlier, with remakes, remaster, and remastered all getting smaller entries, which probably could have been combined. Guess that's the limit of AI for you, though it makes me surprised that there wasn't a smaller entry for Mega Man 1 word. Regardless, while some of these might be false flags or just a stretch, I'd still say that the demand for Mega Man is pretty strong here. And for our final big boy, our surprise winner, Dino Crisis. At least I think it was a surprise. I wasn't expecting it. It's one of those franchises that I only really know by name, so I'm pretty unfamiliar. Honestly, I looked up a commercial, and had you shown it to me without the title, I probably would have confused it for Turok, another game I haven't played. Am I uncultured? Is this a sleeper hit? Well, congrats to the fans of Dino Crisis for making your voices heard. You've certainly made me curious. If Capcom listens, maybe we could be looking at a 2026 where a new Dino Crisis is a Game of the Year contender. Shoot for the stars. Or maybe we just see a re-release or Exoprimal tie-in, like what they're doing with Mega Man. Though if they do a modern port for Switch or Steam, I'll probably give it a look to see what the hype is about. Though speaking of Exoprimal, maybe I'm just missing it, but I'm not seeing it listed here, which isn't great for Capcom's hot new thing. But back to what did make it in, Ace Attorney is pretty big, just not as big as our boy or the dinosaur franchise people actually care about. It's got a few associated hits as well. The Great, Edgeworth, and Investigations, though surprisingly no Phoenix Wright. Trilogy is another one that might refer to the series, since the first 3 games and the next 3 are often divided up with that term, but they're not the only ones. As probably my second favorite Capcom property, it being so large is exciting for me. Even if I am 4 games and 2 spin-offs behind. They'll be great for when I retire. Keep making them. I'm also trying to get my mother into them to get her away from Candy Crush and their push for microtransactions. She'll crack one day if I don't do something. at the same size as Resident Evil, and along with that, there's Outbreak, Veronica, Jill, and Leon. Code Veronica is a side game that I've heard a lot of people ask for a remake of, and I've also heard that there could be some problems with possible remakes of 5 and 6, maybe comparable to Oilman problems, so this could be a good nudge in a different direction for Capcom. Devil May Cry isn't quite as big as the previous ones, though with DMC also being on there, I have to wonder if it would have been one of the big ones if some people hadn't abbreviated. So good going, Devil May Cry fans, but next time, get your terminology together. Sheesh. Dante and Virgil are also on there. Who knew Capcom had so many Divine Comedy readers? There's also entries for Okami and Onimusha, as is Darkstalkers, and seriously, why isn't Darkstalkers Capcom's main fighting series? How is a bunch of movie monsters not more interesting to people than a collection of global stereotypes? Though speaking of, this is the size that Street Fighter and Monster Hunter are at. Kinda surprising, but maybe people figure that they don't really need to ask for them, they'll just keep getting them anyway. It'd be slightly less stupid than if I were to ask Game Freak for more Pokemon. Still though, since we're assuming that this is on the open-ended final question, it wouldn't necessarily be about what people want more of. Lots of people could have just easily yammered on about how many quarters they spent on Street Fighter 2, or about how they met their spouse through Monster Hunter or something. They could have even used that section to voice their gripes, like maybe all the Mega Man mentions are actually complaints that our fanbase whines too much. Oh no. Of course, who's gonna go through 200,000 plus paragraphs to piece together context? All that matters is we got the hits, baby. Not gonna mention much more since we're getting into the tiny zone, but there is mention of Dead Rising and Beautiful Joe. Breath and Fire are listed in 2 different spots, which could point to Breath of Fire, and there's also Stone and Power, which could be Power Stone, but it could also just mean that those words came up for other reasons. Still, have a friend who loves Power Stone, so I'll cross my fingers for him. And surprisingly, the only Versus Capcom title that I noticed was the one for SNK, no Marvel or Tatsunoko. Huh. And while small, there are also mentions of some of the questionable practices Capcom has been pulling lately: microtransactions, monetization, modding, prices, money, listen, and attention. Again, each are small, and without context, it can be hard to say for sure that they were mentioned in a negative way, but given that each could be associated with the options given in the complaint section, I think it likely that some of those answers really resonated with some people. Then there's also the recent modding scandal. But that's about as much as I can pick this list apart. Let me know if there's anything that stood out to you that I might have missed. There was also a bubble for the Japanese side of things, but I cannot read that. Well, I can't read most of it, but some words are in English characters, which is interesting. And given that some of the English stuff doesn't appear on the English version, you can tell that the two weren't just direct translations of each other. Anyway, Basara is pretty front and center, which Sengoku Basara is not one of the series I would have thought of using English characters in its spelling. Maybe someone more in the know can explain this one to me. Also a very small Resident Evil off to the side, which I would have assumed would have been listed as Biohazard, but maybe the Japanese really love 7. Devil May Cry DMC makes sense given the attitude it gives off, and there's also a tiny Dino Crisis off to the side as well. The rest are mostly console names, nothing fancy there, but there's also an X-Die, one word in the top corner. Well, we got a hit, though whether people were talking about offline, online, or just voicing complaints, who can say? Though that said, while I might not be savvy enough to translate this whole image, I can probably manage to at least look into our main interest. Mega Man is Rockman in Japan, so Google, what does Rockman look like in Japanese characters? Okay, cool. Now, are my eyes sharp enough not to confuse this with another set of kanji, katakana, or hiragana? Would like to learn to speak it someday, but I really doubt I'll ever understand the written part. And hey, I think that's it. I think that's Rockman, nice and big and front and center. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I think we're in a place of prominence, and while it's harder to judge text size with a different set of symbols, I think it's still one of the biggest. So yeah, it's not just a Western thing. People like Mega Rock and Capcom's Homeland as well. Oh, this is great. But like I asked when we first discussed the Super Election, does any of this matter? Once again, the answer is maybe. This doesn't tell us the results from the actual questions being asked. If they do release the answers for that, I might do another follow-up, but this is a bit more open-ended and just showing us popular topics rather than specifics. While getting mentioned often is probably a good thing, like I mentioned, some of these words could have been brought up to complain, like, why do you keep spamming us with all this old Mega Man crap, or please stop remaking Resident Evil before it starts another Twitter war. But also, like I said, there's way too many responses to go through, so the numbers are probably going to be the only thing they take note of. Capcom interns, if you're being forced to sift through all the surveys, let me know. Of course, just because something's being asked for doesn't mean that Capcom owes us either. Just because there's a lot of buzz around Dino Crisis and Mega Man doesn't mean that we will, for sure, be given anything. Still though, acknowledging this publicly and then not doing anything with this information would make them look kinda bad, like saying, we've asked for and heard your desires and opinions and will continue to ignore them. So I do feel like this puts a little pressure on Capcom to actually do something new with some of their old properties. Of course, this is me trying to psychoanalyze a big corporation and apply logic to them. Maybe someone in marketing just told them that surveys were a good way to make audiences feel invested, or putting out this bubble is a way to show off how much everybody loves Capcom and all their franchises, or maybe they've given no thought to this at all and nothing will come of it. I'm kind of starting to repeat myself from last time at this point, so I think I'll cap things off by saying that this just tells us that when it comes to demand for some neglected series, we know. Capcom knows. We know that Capcom knows, and Capcom knows that we know, so hopefully this is reflected in upcoming projects. Anyway, that's my takeaway from all this. Probably should have discussed this last week, but I wasn't sure I could get a full video out of it. Then I changed my mind, and also really wanted an extra week to put together my Maverick Hunter X review. The script is done, the recording and editing would have been a rush job though. In other random news that won't actually warrant its own full video, Virtual Unlimited Project launched a Kickstarter and already exceeded its funding goal. I'm telling you this in part in case anyone's interested in a Mega Man Zero game but with pretty anime girls, and at least one boy who is also kinda pretty, and to say that I myself put some money towards it, so my name will show up somewhere once it's done, along with maybe something else. I love the demo for it, which is still up on Steam, so I figure it's a pretty safe bet. And since if you're still listening, you're probably slightly invested, I also wanted to ask what I should do for 1,000 subscribers when the channel hits that point. I have a few ideas, like either streaming all the numbered games in a series, either Classic, X, or Zero, back to back, or a list of my top favorite games of all time, which is basic, but people do love that kind of thing. A Q&A was also suggested, but I have a hard time imagining anyone would have any burning questions to ask me, so I'll just ask for suggestions here and run a poll when we get closer. And I've started writing down video ideas on a notepad rather than just lying to myself and saying I'll remember, so I won't forget. Sorry to anyone who's given me good ideas before this. I suck. That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you like platformers, especially Mega Man. Vote now if you haven't already. Video games are more important than politics.